film. Careen Shannon, our executive producer, who was just integral in making sure this film got made, as hard as it was. So, Careen, I'm going to have you as our interviewer moderator.
Okay.
If you want to sit over here, and Rebecca and I will sit here.
Sounds good.
And then we love, like the Q&A, we love opening it up to the audience, and we'd love to hear your thoughts or your questions.
So first of all, let me just ask a question. Why did you decide to make this film?
I decided to make this film. This audio is just for our mic on our phone, but I decided to make this film because one of my best friends who's here, Kristen Schrecker, who's also our supervisory producer on the film, she had this best friend from high school that was just like popping up on my Facebook feed with these amazing stories. And one of them was this lone woman by herself in her Westy VW van was going out to meet 5,000 migrants on a caravan while Trump was demonizing all the migrants and going out to meet them and standing on top of her car and yelling out things to legal advice. And I'm like, you know, I had retired from documentary filmmaking. I said, never again, it's too hard. But when I heard Rebecca's story, like, I just got hit by a lightning bolt that I had to make this film.
And Rebecca, I know you've been an immigration lawyer for many years, and then you retired at the beginning of the film, but you didn't retire. So what inspired you to do what you did with the caravan?
And let me ask you to talk loudly because we're also live streaming, and that one is not on this mic.
Oh, fantastic. What inspired me? I think just having the tools and the ability to do it. Hearing that there was all these people coming. It's like if you're a doctor and somebody's on a plane and they say there's a doctor in the house, a doctor will respond to that. And I speak the language. I had the experience of providing legal aid for migrants, and I had the van, and I wasn't afraid to go into this. It, in fact, didn't even seem like a scary situation to me. The year prior to that, I'd spent driving that van through Central America with my family. We went from Virginia to Panama, and so I was very familiar with the area. I was comfortable being in that situation, and I had the tools to do it. And I think that just feeling the need, the calling to do something like that. If you're able to, I'm of the opinion that you should.
I know that we have a number of lawyers in the audience. I'd be interested to hear, although you're not immigration lawyers, what it looked like to you from your perspective watching the film.
Overwhelming.
Yeah? Overwhelming?
Yeah.
In what way?
Well, it's kind of like the story of the little Dutch boy who's trying to plug the dam with his face.
Yeah.
That's what I felt like these lawyers are doing. I was very happy to learn that your work has made such a big difference. I would have been really reticent to take that on because it's overwhelming.
Yeah.
But God bless you for doing that.
I think as to those of us who do it, it certainly feels overwhelming. It's you feel like it really is nothing. It's a drop in the bucket, literally. But Kristen told me the story once when I was coming back from one of these type of things of the starfish, the story of the starfish. If you've heard of this, there's a parable of a young person walking down the beach, and somebody's observing them, and as they're walking down the beach, they bend down every so often and pick something up and throw it in the water. And they're doing that the whole length of the beach, and as they get to the observer, he says, "What are you doing?" And the person, it's a young girl, and she's like, "This beach is full of starfish. Don't you see them? They've all been washed up, and I'm helping them. I'm throwing them back in the water." And the observer says, "Well, you're silly. You're not going to make a difference. Look at how many starfish there are." And she bends down, picks one up, and says, "It makes a difference to this one," and throws it into the water. And that's really the only thing that we can do. And I think that that's a message that Charlene comes back to about, the one person. We're only helping one person, but God, the difference, the change that we're making to that one person's life is huge, and that's what gets me through it, at least.
Yes, go ahead.
That was one of the things that really struck me, is the way that Charlene and you were able to find line of success, meaning where is the frontier at which you can make a difference. For example, the disability exception that you were able to take advantage of or utilize in order to help people, as opposed to places where, you know, you had to give that woman advice that she wasn't going to win.
Right.
And so I was just very impressed with how you were able to locate where you could find success. And I guess maybe a question I have is how you were able to kind of gauge that, or did you feel like at different points you had to sort of readjust and figure out where almost the front line was, if you will?
I mean, I think that's the beauty of filmmaking, is that she can edit out, you know, the 50 people that we talked to where there's nothing to say except, Charlene calls it the CTJ, come to Jesus meeting, where she's like, you know, you should look at life in Mexico. You need to look at what your options are here in Mexico, because you're not getting through to the U.S. and, you know, that's not interesting storytelling. That's not interesting filming. So you don't see that. But most of the time, you know, when I've gone to the border, that was most of what my conversations were with people. So, you know, you get a few nuggets where you can actually do something. And, you know, with Yodalis, the Cuban woman, the blind woman going across, it didn't look good. You know, it's ridiculous that, you know, it's portrayed in the movie that they're calling her only to reject her again. Like, what is that? Why did they do that? And they did that 4 times to her before, in the middle of and it was nighttime. It was 9 o'clock at night, and they're like, okay, yeah, now you can come across. Like, it's just cruel. There's no other name for that. But what they're doing, they're just messing with people. And, you know, I don't know if it's still happening, but that was just constant. That's always what was happening.
Yeah, and I'd just like to address your question. I saw these women pivot constantly because Trump was making people pivot constantly. It was every day. One of Mulu said to me when I would call her, I get so scared that he's going to say something that's going to make it more harmful to these people every day, or he's going to do another law. And it was constant. Today, you know, and so... but while things were getting worse and worse in the lawyers' minds, the migrants do not lose hope. They have nothing else to do. And so you saw Nancy and her family, Rebecca left and said, you're not getting through. And she sat in that place for another year. And then the law changed. Biden got elected, they got through. But right after those people got through, the border closed again, and I saw families starting to coalesce at the border and wonder what they were going to do, because they weren't in the MPP program and their borders were closed. And so then they pivot again. What does that family have? They have a totally different legal situation. So it's just so frustrating, and you know, but it's like they're used to it, you know. So Charlene is like, she will take any little, you know, tiny little sliver that she can get through to get somebody across. And then the same with Rebecca. You know, it's like she knows this is the person that can get through today. And so we'll follow. And that's who we followed. So you see a lot of success stories in the film. But you also see people who didn't have lawyers who just jumped right over the river and came over, and they have success too. So, you know, it's like, it's just this survival instinct of human nature, and just never give up.
So I'd never been involved in a documentary film before. I'll get to you in a moment. I was just thinking, I always thought that filmmakers tried to maintain a distance between themselves and their subjects. Vicki is not that kind of filmmaker, as you could tell. But I just want to laud her because she is single-handedly responsible for bringing a lot of people to safety.
Thank you.
You had a question?
Oh, just about the filmmaking. You said you were like trying to retire from documentary, and like you're tired, and then you made this amazingly ambitious film with footage from all over the world, and I'm like, whoa, that's flipping the other way. How did you go about getting all that material and all those stories, and then doing your weave?
So, as some of you may know, February of 2020, the world changed, and I had only been filming since the end of January into the beginning of February, and then everything started shutting down. But I'm a creative, scrappy documentary filmmaker. So the first thing I did, and I had already asked Rebecca to film herself. I didn't have any budget to go to where she lives in San Miguel de Allende. I said, "Are you doing anything cool?" You know, I'd check in with her. "Oh, there's another caravan coming. Don't you want to go follow that?" So I'm waiting for something big, but in the meantime, I'm like, film your everyday activities that have to do with the law or even your family. So like those are actually Rebecca with her iPhone filming herself.
iPhone 7, not even a fancy one.
I know, but I have since upgraded her to a 10, used 10. And then, Mulu's daughter was living with her during COVID and is actually in film school in Los Angeles. So she got, footage. So I kept them, I kept the film going during COVID that way. We also did a couple of shoots ourselves. I have a lot of friends for 20 years in this business, and we always work on each other's projects. So the producer of the film is Laura Seltzer-Dunai, who's done films. Her last film was on Holocaust refugees, and I worked on that with her, also for almost nothing. And so she comes and works on my film. Another guy is a good friend of mine who worked on a film. He's the head of Kaiser Permanente's, all their videos. All of his vacations were taken to work on my film. So that's how you just kind of take a project, and there were times when people said, "Oh, it should be a short," and I said, "No, it needs to be a short." And also Rebecca was the one who I said, "Rebecca, you're going to be like my main feature character," and then Rebecca's like, "No way. There are so many other women who are out there. You have to meet this Charlene person." And so when I met Charlene, I realized what Rebecca was talking about. I mean, Charlene is like the greatest gift to documentary film character, and also a nightmare to follow because she doesn't want me to film any of her subjects, any of her clients, because she's a lawyer. So filming lawyers was not easy. They're like, "Oh, you can't film them." I'm like, they have the right to speak to me if they want to. So so it was like there was a little clash. Well, there's a lot of clashes, but it turned out great because we just kept going, and it's been 3 years to almost to the day since we started this project. So that's not too bad considering COVID and everything.
Anyone else have questions? Yes.
So in terms of trying to get the film out more to everyone, to a broader audience, how did you have success getting into the Portland Film Festival, and are there other similar opportunities or venues that you can work on?
I'd like Careen to address that because we are thinking out of the box. The film festival circuit has totally changed, and we have a lot going on. So I'll have Careen talk about how we're getting the film in front of audiences.
Yes, I'm working with our producer, Laura Seltzer-Janai. She's also our impact producer. And the point is to have an impact, to roll out a kind of educational strategy. So we're working on getting the film in front of audiences at colleges, at law schools, to inspire people to go into immigration law, community organizations, immigrants' rights organizations around the country. We've already got a few lined up in the Bay Area, in Los Angeles, in Buffalo. We're going to be going to New York and D.C. Film festivals are great, and we have a number of others that are online, and we're waiting to hear from a few more. But that's not really what this is about for us. None of us did this to become rich and famous. We'd like to get a distribution deal if we can, of course. Right. Well, we're all technically retired.
All of you are retired. It sounds like.
Right. So, yeah, this is what retirement looks like these days, right? But we want to use the film as an educational tool. That's really its purpose. So any of you, if you are involved in fundraising, right? So we'll partner with organizations to fundraise for their causes and their organizations. So anybody who is involved in or knows people in organizations that might like to bring the film to their audiences, let us know. Let us know today, or come onto our website. There's a How You Can Help page also that points out some specific organizations that we worked with during the filming of the movie, and also how you can help people in the film itself. For example, Giselle, the young girl who lost her legs, needs a new wheelchair. So we're fundraising for things like that.
Are there resources for practicing lawyers who don't know anything about immigration law to get trained and no, to go down and do this work?
He's Spanish speaking, by the way.
Yeah.
That's important.
Yeah.
That's really important. Going down, I'm not sure that there's such a need anymore, like for physical presence at the border, but there's definitely, and I'm drawing a blank on the many emails that I get, but there are, and I can, afterwards I'll be happy to look those up for you. They're always looking for volunteers. Currently, I think it's probably, is it TPS for Venezuelans? There's something
Asylum in general.
Asylum in general.
Asylum.
Mm-hmm. There's definitely always a need. There's certainly a need for Spanish-speaking lawyers is huge. That was, another thing that, at the beginning, there's lots of lawyers wanting to come down to the border and wanting to come down and help, but they don't speak Spanish. And it's like, thank you for your willingness to do it, but without that pivotal part, you're really not,
French is important now too because
Yeah, the Haitians.
Haitians are the second largest after Venezuelans, the largest group down there.
And I think, one thing to be aware of, Ukraine is definitely on the forefront right now, but the Ukrainians have, they're literally rolling out the red carpet for Ukrainians to come across the border. We work with an organization called the Sidewalk School, and they have noticed in Reynosa, or have noted that in Reynosa, most of the migrants are black, are Haitians, and it's so obvious the racism that's happening, that the Ukrainians show up, they get sent to a private shelter, they get put on a bus and right to the border the next day. Like, there's not even time to use the supplies that are in this beautiful new shelter that's reserved specifically for Ukrainians, whereas the Haitians and the Central Americans have been languishing for a year trying to get through. So, when you allocate your time, I would encourage you to do so for Central American and Haitians, despite the sexiness of the Ukrainians right now. But everybody needs help, absolutely. But the Ukrainian or the black and brown migrants are most vulnerable and most in need.
I was confused, and I would appreciate if you could clarify. Under Biden, are they still wait in place in Mexico? Okay, so the only change we've seen has been they've gang violence is now a criteria. What improvements have Biden made?
Yeah, again, this is the thing that changes every day too, because there are lawsuits, and then this will change and that'll change. From what I can see at the border, and we have Marichel, who you see in the film at the end. She's in Tijuana. It's the same. There's still a huge tent city with no services, no Red Cross, no doctors. Literally, there's just no help at the border. Some of these border towns have pop-up refugee camps, and then in Matamoros there was a lot of services. But because that was against Trump, I think a lot of people stopped caring. They thought, oh, Biden's in, it's a Democratic who's going to be good with immigration. It's a humanitarian disaster still. People are getting through. And they're getting through by just legally too. Yeah. There's a certain amount per day. So there's a certain amount per day who can cross on the bridge and go, and an officer stands in the middle of the bridge and they say, I want to ask for asylum, and they'll put you through to this line. Some get through and some don't.
I think actually we want to clarify that a little bit because there's Title 42, the public health law, and MPP. So these two things were working in conjunction under Trump, and Biden has lifted MPP, but Title 42 still remains in place. So it's kind of like a castle with a moat and a drawbridge, or rather a moat and a big door. So the door still remains locked, or they've unlocked the door, but they've lowered the drawbridge. No, the drawbridge is still up. You know what I'm saying? They're not letting people still aren't getting in,
But some people are getting in still. Very few people.
The vulnerable exceptions. People with extreme vulnerabilities, but just generally, and to point out that it's legal to ask for asylum. It's legal to go to the port of entry and say that you're afraid. It's legal to be in the United States, even if you've crossed undocumented. It's legal to, once you get caught, to say, I am afraid, I want to seek protection, and that's 100% following the laws.
Yeah, and just to clarify one other point, we saw people able to come in when MPP was rolled back by the Biden administration, but the Supreme Court very quickly forced them to re-implement it. It went up and down through the court system. The state of Texas, surprise, surprise, and a few other states sued to keep NPP in place.
What is that, MPP?
So that's what it stands for, Migrant Protection Protocols, which to me is an Orwellian nonsense of a title.
We call it Migrant Persecution Protocols.
It was the agreement with Mexico that asylum seekers seeking to come to the United States had to stay in Mexico until they could see an immigration judge. And it can take a year or 2 years sometimes before you get before an immigration judge.
I really appreciate that you're doing this one by one instead of the class action kind of approach, which you clarified at the beginning. But what would be the most from just
back to you.
opening the gates, what would help these people the most from the standpoint of a policy change that the U.S. is making?
I mean, I think rolling back to where we were before Trump showed up, it wasn't ideal, but Trump put these huge obstacles in that were completely illegal. They violate domestic law, they violate international humanitarian law, they violate treaties that we are signatories to. So just at the very least, going back to, not having, basically going back to people are afraid, you show up to the border and you say, I'm afraid, and they are giving a free, or rather a fair hearing, a full and fair hearing as to on the merits of their case.
So before Trump, where would they go if they crossed the border? Would they then be able to go to their families or people they knew, or they go straight to those penitentiaries that are whatever millions of dollars?
So it depends. The government literally has a number of bed spaces available in detention facilities per day. And so if you are lucky enough to get in there after those beds are filled that day, they'll let you in, especially if you have family you can go to, and they'll say go to the immigration court in the city that is your destination. If you're not lucky enough to get in, to show up at the border before the beds are filled, you're going to be sent to detention. I wanted to also address John's question, though. I mean, unfortunately, not everybody fits into the 5 categories under which we will grant asylum. As Rebecca explained in the movie, it has to be based on your race, religion, your nationality, your political opinion, or that you're a member of a particular social group that's being persecuted in your country. We don't recognize economic refugees under U.S. law, and climate change refugees, which is a big thing now. I think a big policy change that would be helpful is if we had some kind of essential worker program. We have jobs that go unfilled, and we have people that want to do those jobs. And they shouldn't have to do them illegally, without labor law protections and all the rest. If we had an actual pathway for people to come in legally, they wouldn't have to be jumping over the fence.
Hi, I have some information that may be of interest to you. In Multnomah County, Oregon, where we are today, we have 38 judges. 2 recent appointments are women judges. One was sent from her mother with her brother and sister from El Salvador
Wow.
as children. And they walked all through Mexico and they made it to the United States. She's a judge now.
That's fantastic.
The other story is that there was the newest appointed judge was in a refugee camp in Laos, where she and her family were trying to evade political persecution, and she made it. And her career before she took the bench was as an immigration lawyer.
Yay!
Awesome.
That's great.
And I have a great deal of respect for both of them for different reasons, but they're both excellent judges. Now, the other thing that I had a question. I noticed in the news that Venezuela has an inordinate number of refugees seeking asylum. Can somebody enlighten me into what's going on there?
Well, since Maduro took over and the country has gone into economic freefall, a lot of people from Venezuela have been leaving for years, mostly going to other Latin American countries. But I think in the wake of COVID, with those economies also struggling, a lot of those Venezuelans have been making their way north, along with the Haitians. A lot of the Haitians that we met had not come directly from Haiti. They've been living in Brazil or Chile or Peru for many years, until the jobs that they had been taking were drying up because of the pandemic, and they were making their way north. But that, particularly with Venezuelans, that's my understanding of why we're suddenly seeing so many Venezuelans at the border. Yeah.
I've been very distressed about Vice President Harris and what she said about immigrants when she was sent on that mission and told everybody not to come.
Yeah.
Don't come. And that's how I'm viewing the Biden administration. I mean, Kamala took the fall, and I think that was terrible.
No, I agree. I feel like she was set up for failure. It's not an easy post to be in, but she certainly did not come out of the gate with anything that was helpful. And, to the extent that some of us had hope that with a change of administration, things were going to get better at the border, I think the film shows pretty clearly that that's not been the case.
Do you think there's
You want to take that?
Actually, I think that's a great question because, you know,
Can you repeat the question? For
the
that
question is there any hope, or is there any hope to send money to these countries to improve the situations there so that they don't have to come? And I think that, you know, that's ultimately the root cause. You know, if people, they don't want to come. People don't want to leave their families. They don't want to leave their jobs. They don't want to pick up and pack, you know, everything they own into a backpack and walk across, you know, multiple countries with their children. Nobody wants to do that. So I think that is definitely, you know, improving climate change. I mean, there's just a broad group of things that need to be done. You know, jobs, removing corruption, providing educational opportunities. I was surprised at the extent of corruption in El Salvador, where people who get ahead a little bit then are subject to gangs demanding protection money from them. So if you make $20, the gangs are going to take 10 of it from you, and if you don't pay, then they kill you. And it's just as clear cut as that. So, you know, I think that in my ideal world, something like a Marshall Plan for Central America, where we just put lots of money and lots of effort and support into these places to build up the institutions that have fallen thanks to decades of U.S. geopolitical interference, going back, you know, way back when, where the U.S. propped up strict military dictatorships to protect U.S. commercial interests. You know, so it's just this cycle thing. So I think that that's a pie in the sky sort of wish, because it is really so corrupt. There are no really functioning institutions. The governments are in cahoots with the gangs, and there's just rampant, you know, narco trafficking and human trafficking, and just it really is a mess. And I think that maybe the reason that I do this work is because that is just way too big to think about. Like, I can't even begin to where you start with the policies that change it. Or I have lots of ideas of where to start with the policies, but the will and the money to make it happen. If you could wave a wand, yeah, absolutely. So I think, you know, going back to the starfish, you know, we help the one person, and it sucks because it is just your finger in a dike. You're not lowering the water behind the other side of the dam. We're just doing what we can, and unfortunately, it's not sustainable, really. There needs to be bigger ideas.
You mentioned a couple of times now in the film at the end, you mentioned the role of climate change in creating migration. Could you speak to that a little bit and kind of connect the dots there?
Sure. You know, during the caravan, it was interesting. The question is the role that climate change is playing in the forcing people to migrate. And during the caravan in 2018, there was a lot of journalists there, and there was also the Weather Channel. And I thought, you know, what is this? Why are you here? Are you labeling this a tsunami of humanity? Like, it just felt kind of stupid to me. And they're like, no, you know, the reason that they're going is because the lack of the rainy season causes crops to fail and people don't have food to eat. And so it's things like that. It's increased flooding in places that are along the water. And it really is very drastic. You know, I was recently in Costa Rica, and they were telling me about how the sugarcane crops, there was no rain this year, so people don't have money. So it's as simple as that. There's just nothing. You know, the climate is definitely changing, and it's definitely affecting people. And if you can't grow, a lot of people live subsistence level farming, and if your crops fail this year, you don't have any other option. Was that responsive?
Yeah, I think about even going back as far as Hurricane Mitch in
Absolutely.
Honduras.
Mm-hmm.
And then I wonder whether that created not only a push into the United States, but a push into urban areas, which created more of a instability in the urban areas, which then is kind of labeled gang violence or other instability, and then that pushes for further migration into up north. Did you see that, or is that a...
I think absolutely, yeah. You know, people who are living subsistence farming in rural areas lose their crops. They go into the cities. What options do they have? Their kids, maybe they can go to school, maybe they're not, but then maybe they open a little tienda, a little shop, and then that's when the gangs start preying on them, or they drive a bus, and then the bus route is on the path, on that route where the gang starts taking money from that bus driver. I mean, it's so insidious in so many ways, in so many weird ways, that as a foreigner, as somebody who's traveled through these places, didn't touch us at all. I was afraid to drive through El Salvador because I had just done an asylum case for a Salvadoran, and I'm like, I am definitely not going there. But then as we were there, like, they're not touching Americans. I'm not there long enough. I'm not involved in the drug trade. I'm not running a business. They're not coming after me. But it's so everybody is affected by it, I believe. Anyone?
I could just, I have a lot of thoughts on that as well. But it's interesting when we do talk about, environmental change affecting migration. That's, since the dawn of humanity, right? So always, if your house fled, you have to leave. If your crops fail, you have to leave. We're all nomadic. We all have mobility, and like every animal, you go. And so I think that's the more permanent thing. And I was a permanent, reason that you would have to leave if your land turns into the Dust Bowl, and that was human caused. But there's a lot of just natural weather patterns that will change over time, over millennia. But now I'm like losing my train of thought. With shorter term, I covered Colombia for many years. I did 3 projects in Colombia, and when the first time I was there, the FARC, 25 years ago, the FARC bombed the electric towers right in Bogota. All the lights went out, and the guy said, "Oh yeah, I think we got some," they're very casual about it. And now it's like where all the Venezuelans are going. It's very safe. There's a peace process that happened. So in decades or centuries, you can change the political problems. Stupid drug war. If that ends, that'll solve a lot, right? I mean, that is just a disaster. 50 years of a failed drug war that's causing so much of this violence and migration. So those things can be solved relatively easily in a decade if the will and the political will is there. The climate stuff is going to happen, whether it's human-induced or not, and it's going to cause things where the migration patterns change permanently.
I'd enjoy hearing from the filmmakers just your backgrounds, a bit about your backgrounds and how you came to doing this film. Just what did you do in the past?
So I went to school for geology. I worked on Mount Rainier volcano, and I fell in love with this area. During that time, I was in graduate school. I worked at the Portland Oregonian as a science writer fellow. So I really wanted to end up in this area because, it's just very big in nature and the volcanoes. So then I went to work as a PR person for NASA, covering their Earth science, which their satellites were looking at environmental changes, the satellites that are pointing at the Earth. So I covered Earth science for NASA. Desertification, they called it, in Africa. The rainforest really seen on the global scale. That was 25 years ago. That was the first time people were looking at it on that scale. It was super important data. My boss was not a nice person, and we always had conflict, and he wouldn't let me work and do a lot of projects. So I'd sit in my office and I started writing a book. I heard about a volcanic disaster in Colombia. I started writing that book, and I got an agent and I got a big book deal, and that was 22 years ago, and I have never had a real job since. Thank you. It's been a struggle, but then, from book writing, I fell in love with Colombia. I wrote a book about this volcanic disaster in Colombia. I've always been very political. The drug war is a big thing for me, as I mentioned earlier. The next book was Held Hostage in Colombia, about the drug war in Colombia and American hostages and Colombian hostages that the guerrillas had taken. And then
The movie, Ingrid?
and then I made a movie about a woman who was kidnapped while she was running for president. That was my first movie, film. And even to this day, this is my 5th film. I do not consider myself a filmmaker. I just fall into these things. I don't know how, can't get myself out of it, but I'm really a writer more than anything. So a lot of stuff I've done in Central America, and this In between, I did something about China and selling how we sold all our technology to China. Yeah, film about offshore tax havens. I mean, I just kind of, I'm very ADHD, I guess, with my topics.
Eclectic.
Eclectic.
So if Vicki doesn't call herself a filmmaker, I certainly can't call myself a filmmaker. I've been practicing immigration law for 30 years myself, mostly in a big firm, but I've done a lot of pro bono work down at the border, mostly in detention centers in Texas. A few years ago, my husband and I bought a house in San Miguel de Allende in Mexico, and I met Rebecca at some migrant-centered event because I was kind of looking for my people there, and we became friends. And she told me, hey, you know, they're making a movie about me and some other immigration lawyers. I'm like, oh, how great for you. That's nice. And she kept dropping hints and mentioning it, and they were already a year and a half into it before I got involved. I looked at the website they'd built and watched the trailer of the movie, and I said, oh, wow. Just the trailer was enough for me to say, okay, I want to be involved in this somehow. And I reached out to Vicki, and now here we are with a movie.
And she saved from the depths of me not wanting to make the film anymore, right in the middle. I was ready to give up.
Other questions?
How did you decide where to end it? One of the things about these projects where the story keeps on going is how and where.
That is such a good question for all documentary filmmakers, right? Because there are those who, you know, when I first started making films, they'd say, yeah, I've been working on this for 10 years. And I was like, oh my God. I think I'm more of a journalist than a documentary filmmaker. So I feel I look in story arcs, and I'm always looking for the ending and the beginning. And I realized that, you know, the ending would have my son, who was the editor. My son is a Cameroonian refugee that I met while making this film. He was trapped in Mexico. He jumped the fence. He was in detention. He got out and edited this film. And he works a lot in DC now. He just got his asylum. Yay, Simon. He's very shy and he doesn't want to come to any film festivals. But so he and I worked together. He did this very kind of flashy ending where you see all these refugees, and that's when you feel like this is a drop in the bucket. It'll never end. But then we come back, and I had a friend named Paul Rackman. He started the Slam Dance Film Festival, and his wife is one of my best friends. And I said, can you guys watch this rough cut? And we didn't know how to end it at that point. We had so much material. And he said, what about Oscar? What happened to Oscar? And I said, well, I'm going to put that in the epilogue meaning the running during the credits. And he goes, no, I think it should end on that. And I was like, wow, that's a really good idea, but all I have is this crappy iPhone footage. He goes, all the better, right? It is so raw, but you go from seeing everyone, like millions of people in all these countries, to Careen hugging Oscar.
Charlene.
I do that all the time. Sorry, Careen. Charlene, see what I'm talking about, like happy things? I call it. But so, you know, she's hugging him, and that was shot by Oscar's brother on a phone, obviously. But she says in the very beginning of the film, I think we need to help people one at a time because you're changing their life forever. So that ended up being a great ending in my mind.
But you also were going to end it with, I remember when you were going to end it with the election. Oh, and everything's going to be great now.
Right.
When it wasn't, then you continued to film more.
Right. So this is Yasmin Jameson, production manager and publicist of my film, and one of my best friends as well. She's been through this whole thing. We also met doing immigration advocacy probably about 5 or 6 years ago. And I didn't necessarily think that I wasn't a huge fan of Biden or Obama's immigration policy. So I didn't necessarily think it was going to get better, but it's an easy arc for a film. And I'm not one of these filmmakers that wants to take 10 years to make a film. So I thought if I just go to the election, everybody can be like, rah, rah. Yeah, it's going to be a shit show after, I'm pretty sure. But at least it's a good narrative arc. So always having something in mind and knowing that it's always going to change. That's documentary filmmaking.
I have a question for the two lawyers here, immigration lawyers. Did you guys go to law school with the idea that you were going to be immigration specialists?
I certainly didn't. I wanted to do something international, and I think a lot of immigration lawyers have this notion of, oh, I'll practice international law. It turns out, what is that, right? And then I took a clinic my third year. I took an immigration clinic in law school, and it kind of brought everything together for me because it is international law, right? It's international issues. It implicates all sorts of policy issues, and I just loved that it wasn't necessarily being in court all the time. There was a lot of kind of more social advocacy and the opportunity to help people one-on-one. And so that's how I ended up in immigration law.
I started off wanting to save the world, just be sort of a general hero. But I did want to do environmental law until I found out that was super boring. Like, that's just reading things and there's no people involved. And then my parents are both immigrants. My dad was a refugee, and then it occurred to me that, at some point in my family's refugee journey, somebody must have helped them. And that's when I got interested in immigration law. And except for the same thing, I'm like, oh, I get to travel. And I'm not traveling at all, but kind of vicariously through the clients that come into my office.
And when you do travel, you're not going to vacations.
Not anymore. Well, now, yeah.
She vacations a lot.
Now the truth can be told.
San Miguel's nice.
San Miguel's gorgeous. I'm really lucky that we got to end up there.
Well, thank you so much for coming. If you guys are, thank you. I just want to say, if you're local and you know people in Portland, we have one more screening on Friday night at 5 p.m. And if you're welcome to come to that one too, or the party after, which is at 7:30. No, sorry, 5, 6, 7:30.
Postcards.
Right near here. So, let us know, and it'll be following the screening. We'll tell everyone the address, and or we can tell you guys now.
I have the cards.
The cards. We have cards with the address on it because we'll all be there, as well as another woman who is funder of the film. And I'd like to give a shout out to, and I don't remember, for also being a funder of the film. Thank you very much. As you can tell, it's super important. And to have that funding, Judith is one of the funders, and she's throwing us an after party. And she works to fund the shelter that you see in the film. So, all right. Thank you so much.